I said, stop singing that song, Claire, just stop it. David's voice cracked like a whip through the kitchen, raw and louder than it needed to be. Claire flinched, clutching the dish towel in her hand. Her mouth was still open, her voice still echoing faintly in the corners of the house, as if it hadn't gotten the message yet. From the floor, Maple whimpered her golden retriever, 7 years old and usually as silent as snowfall. But now, again, like always, the moment Claire reached that familiar line in the lullaby, Maple would rise onto shaky legs, pace the same tight oval near the pantry, and then collapse in a puddle of fur and sorrow, eyes wide and wet, a sound in her throat that was not quite a bark and not quite a cry. Claire said nothing to David. She never argued when he was in that mood. Instead, she knelt beside Maple, pressing her cheek against the dog's ear. She whispered, "It's just a song, baby, just a silly little song." But Maple's breathing was ragged now, chest fluttering like a trapped bird. Claire could feel it beneath her palm, shallow, fast, almost panicked. And this wasn't new. It had happened for years now. Every single time Claire sang that lullaby, every time she reached the words "sleep now, love, the stars are near," Maple would unravel. At first, Claire had brushed it off. Some dogs hated vacuums, Maple hated lullabies. But over time it began to haunt her. Why that song? Why only that song? Maple didn't react to thunderstorms, fireworks, or even ambulance sirens. But that melody is so soft, so simple, it shattered her. She hadn't sung it in months, maybe longer. But tonight, the house had felt too empty, too quiet, and Claire's throat had hummed it without permission. The way grief leaks out in moments you think you're okay now. Standing alone in the hallway with Maple curled beside her feet, Claire felt something begin to gnaw at the edges of memory. That song, that melody, why did it feel borrowed? Maple's eyes flicked toward the old hallway door, the one to the cellar no one used. Claire stared at it for a long time. She didn't move, but something had. Something had shifted in the air, and in the silence that followed, she suddenly remembered. She hadn't written that lullaby. She had heard it once, somewhere long before. Maple had come into her life, long before she had even met David. The tune was older than their marriage, older than this house, older maybe than Claire was ready to admit. Said, "Stop singing that song, Claire, just stop it." David's voice cracked like a whip through the kitchen, raw and louder than it needed to be. Claire flinched, clutching the dish towel in her hand. Her mouth was still open, her voice still echoing faintly in the corners of the house, as if it hadn't gotten the message yet. From the floor, Maple whimpered her golden retriever, 7 years old and usually as silent as snowfall. But now, again, like always, the moment Claire reached that familiar line in the lullaby, Maple would rise onto shaky legs, pace the same tight oval near the pantry, and then collapse in a puddle of fur and sorrow, eyes wide and wet, a sound in her throat that was not quite a bark and not quite a cry. Claire said nothing to David. She never argued when he was in that mood. Instead, she knelt beside Maple, pressing her cheek against the dog's ear. She whispered, "It's just a song, baby, just a silly little song." But Maple's breathing was ragged now, chest fluttering like a trapped bird. Claire could feel it beneath her palm, shallow, fast, almost panicked. And this wasn't new. It had happened for years now. Every single time Claire sang that lullaby, every time she reached the words "sleep now, love, the stars are near," Maple would unravel. At first, Claire had brushed it off. Some dogs hated vacuums, Maple hated lullabies. But over time it began to haunt her. Why that song? Why only that song? Maple didn't react to thunderstorms, fireworks, or even ambulance sirens. But that melody is so soft, so simple, it shattered her. She hadn't sung it in months, maybe longer. But tonight, the house had felt too empty, too quiet, and Claire's throat had hummed it without permission. The way grief leaks out in moments you think you're okay now. Standing alone in the hallway with Maple curled beside her feet, Claire felt something begin to gnaw at the edges of memory. That song, that melody, why did it feel borrowed? Maple's eyes flicked toward the old hallway door, the one to the cellar no one used. Claire stared at it for a long time. She didn't move, but something had. Something had shifted in the air, and in the silence that followed, she suddenly remembered. She hadn't written that lullaby. She had heard it once, somewhere long before. Maple had come into her life, long before she had even met David. The tune was older than their marriage, older than this house, older maybe than Claire was ready to admit. Claire didn't sleep that night. She lay on the couch, Maple curled against her side like a child, her fur warm and slightly damp from the earlier panic. David had gone to bed, without another word, and the silence he left behind hung like heavy cloth draped over the corners of the room. Outside, the trees moaned in the wind, their shadows slicing across the walls in long twitching lines. Claire didn't dare hum again, but the lullaby looped in her head, quiet and strange. "Sleep now, love, the stars are near, .. She couldn't remember when she'd first heard it. She'd always assumed she made it up, a tune invented in the soft, imaginative corners of girlhood. But now she wasn't so sure. The next morning, the first thing she did before tea, before David was pulled the box down from the hallway closet, The box had lived there for years, untouched and sealed with brittle packing tape. Inside were her journals, some photos, and a shoebox of cassette tapes she'd nearly forgotten about. She plugged the dusty player in and began flipping through the tapes. Most were labeled Choir Recital 98, Dad's Voice, Claire, age 12. But one stood out. It had no label, just a single piece of masking tape, old and curling at the edges. She inserted the tape and pressed play. Static. Then, faint and distant like sound bleeding through time, a soft voice began to sing. Not hers. The voice was older, cracked with time, but unmistakably feminine. Sleep now, love. The stars are near. ... Claire's blood went cold. The lullaby. The same exact one. Not similar. Not inspired. The same gentle tempo. The same melancholic melody. Every word. Maple had been resting beside her, but the moment the voice began, she sat up like she'd been shocked. Her ears twitched, her mouth opened slightly. And then, as the second line fell, shadows drift, but I am here. ... Maple began to cry, a low guttural sound that rose from deep inside her chest, as if pulled from somewhere far away. Claire hit stop. Silence crashed over the room. Maple stared at the tape player. One moving. Claire whispered, "Where did you come from?" But she wasn't talking to the tape anymore. She was looking at Maple. That evening, after David left to run errands, Claire opened the bottom drawer of the file cabinet and pulled out Maple's adoption records. She hadn't looked at them in years. The folder was slim, just a single intake form and a photograph. From the shelter, the dog had come from a storm evacuation zone in northern Louisiana. No prior owner listed, no chip, just female retriever mix, approx. 1-year-old, found near rural property. Claire flipped the paper over. One small, handwritten note in the corner. Wren Hollow, Bayou Parish. That name struck her like a cold gust of wind. Wren Hollow. She had been there once, years ago, long before Maple. She had spent a single summer there during her early 20s as part of a music therapy internship. The town was small, damp, forgotten. She remembered the chipped paint on the white church, the dragonflies above the swamp, and the woman with the broken voice. Mrs. Eloise. She'd been a stroke survivor in her 70s. Claire had visited her every week with a tape recorder and a keyboard. She hadn't remembered much, only fragments, but Eloise used to hum, over and over, same melody, same song. Claire had recorded it, thinking it might help reconstruct the woman's memory. But the woman had died that August, and Claire left town and buried the experience in the years that followed. The internship was never mentioned again until now. Claire sat down on the living room rug, the tape in her hand, the dog beside her. "Did you live there too?" she asked Maple, her voice barely audible. "Were you one of hers?" It sounded crazy, ludicrous, but she couldn't shake the feeling the way Maple had reacted, not to Claire's voice, but to Eloise's. That night she waited until David was asleep before singing it again, not to provoke Maple, but softly, gently, to see what would happen. This time, Maple didn't cry. She whined low, then walked slowly to the kitchen and sat facing the back door. Claire followed. Maple didn't move, didn't look at her, just stared at the wood, tail twitching once. Claire opened it. The night was warm, humid, the kind of heavy southern air that clung to your skin. Maple stepped out and stood still, and then Claire saw it, beyond the trees, a light, faint flickering like a lantern. But they had no neighbors that way, only woods. Maple took a few steps forward, looked back. Claire hesitated at the doorframe. Her instincts whispered caution, but something else tugged harder. Curiosity, memory, a thread that needed pulling. She grabbed a flashlight and followed the dog. Neither of them knew it yet, but the path they stepped into that night would unravel a story buried in silence, of music, of grief, and of a voice that was never meant to be forgotten. Something had been calling them both, and now it was finally time to listen. Claire hadn't spoken to David since that night. Not really. There had been the clatter of plates, the dry rustle of mail being sorted, a mumbled "pass the salt," but nothing real. Whatever thread had held them together all these years was fraying now, quiet and invisible, yet undeniable. But Claire wasn't focused on David anymore. Not since Maple had changed. The night she sang that lullaby again, just a hum, almost involuntary. Maple had done more than whimper. She had howled. A low, wounded sound, heart-racking and full of something Claire couldn't name. Not pain, not fear, something deeper, like mourning. Claire had dropped the plate in her hand, glass shattering at her feet, but she didn't move. Maple's eyes had locked with hers, and in them Claire saw something that rattled her bones: recognition. The next morning, Claire dug through the attic. Not for answers, she didn't know what she was looking for, only that she had to find something. Dust powdered her sleeves as she opened a long-forgotten cedar chest she barely remembered owning. Inside, old children's books, moth-eaten scarves, a faded music box shaped like a house. She wound it out of curiosity. The box creaked and stuttered, and then there it was, that lullaby, off-key, slower, but the same. The melody that made Maple weep. Claire sat back hard on her heels. Her chest was tightening, her eyes stinging. The song wasn't hers. It had belonged to someone else before her. She reached into the box again, deeper this time, and found a photograph folded in thirds, a woman, young, in a yellow sundress. Her smile was shy, her eyes uncertain. Claire didn't recognize her, but the dog beside her, a young golden retriever with the same caramel swirls behind the ears, the same white patch on the pit, was Maple. Claire's hands began to shake. The photograph was dated April 2009, 2 years before Claire had adopted Maple from the rescue shelter. She turned the photo over. In soft, looping script, Maribel and Juno, her favorite lullaby is the only thing that helps the nightmares. Claire stared at the words until they blurred. Juno. That had been Maple's shelter name. She remembered thinking it was lovely, old-fashioned. She remembered not asking questions, just signing the paperwork because something in her had connected with that dog at first glance. She had no idea Maple had been someone else's before, that someone had sung her the same lullaby, that someone, somewhere, had loved her enough to write those words. When Claire came back down the attic stairs, Maple was waiting, sitting perfectly still at the base of the steps, eyes watchful. Claire sat on the landing, legs trembling. "Who were you before me?" she whispered. Maple laid her head in Claire's lap and let out a sigh, the kind that sounded too human to ignore. That night, Claire didn't sing the lullaby. She played the music box instead, let it creak and groan and spill out the broken little tune in all its fractured familiarity. Maple didn't cry this time. She didn't move at all. She just sat facing the back door, ears alert, as if waiting for someone. Claire couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling until the shadows changed shape. Around 2 a.m. she got up and padded, barefoot, through the house. The living room felt colder than usual, and Maple was nowhere in sight. The back door was slightly ajar. Panic lanced through Claire's chest. She pulled it open and stepped onto the porch. Moonlight silvered the lawn. Maple stood motionless near the garden, facing the dark woods. Claire called her name softly. Maple turned, just her head. Her eyes looked sad, but not afraid. Claire took a step forward and then froze. There, at the edge of the woods, was a figure. Not quite shadow, not quite light. A woman, barefoot, a yellow dress hanging like memory against her legs. She didn't move, didn't speak. She just stood there, one hand at her side, the other raised gently as if waving. Not at Claire, at Maple. Claire blinked, and the figure was gone. She stumbled to the lawn, breath hitching in her throat. But there was no one, nothing, only Maple, calm now, ears relaxed. She walked back to the porch on her own and sat down beside Claire, pressing her weight into her like she always did when Claire cried. Claire wasn't crying, not yet, but the tears were there, held just beneath the surface. She wrapped her arms around Maple, held her close, and whispered, "She loved you. I can feel it." And in that moment, Claire understood something simple and awful and beautiful. The lullaby had never been hers. It had been passed through hands, through hearts, from one broken soul to another. A melody that carried memory, grief, maybe even healing. And Maple, that sweet dog with the old soul, had remembered every note. Claire didn't need answers anymore. She just needed to keep singing. Even if it hurt, especially if it hurt, because sometimes love doesn't vanish. It lingers, in lullabies, in paw prints, in the quiet way a dog waits by the door for someone who no longer comes. Claire didn't sleep that night, not truly. Her body lay still beneath the quilt, but her mind wandered, tugging on frayed threads she hadn't touched in years. She kept hearing the melody in her head, the one she'd sung since she was a teenager, the one Maple couldn't bear. "Sleep now, love. The stars are near." The words played on a loop, uninvited, and with each pass a memory stirred, but never fully surfaced. By morning, Claire had made up her mind. She needed answers. And if she couldn't get them from David, who had stormed out late last night and hadn't come back, then she'd get them from Maple's past. The adoption center was still open. After some pleading and several old email searches, Claire was able to get in touch with a retired employee who vaguely remembered Maple's original intake. "We don't keep many detailed notes beyond the standard health stuff," the woman warned her over the phone. "But Maple, yeah, that was a hard one. She came from a seizure case, backyard breeding or hoarding, can't recall which. Honestly, it was awful. A lot of trauma in that bunch." The phrase echoed in Claire's skull long after the call ended. A lot of trauma. She looked down at Maple, sleeping quietly by the window. The afternoon sun had warmed her fur, but her ears twitched even in dreams. Claire's hands trembled as she picked up her phone again, this time searching online for news articles about hoarding cases near her city. It took nearly an hour, but she found something, an old news report, 6 years back, with grainy photos of a home in rural Bellwood County. The article was short: 37 dogs seized, 3 didn't survive, charges filed, and one small detail in the corner of a caption caught her eye. Some of the puppies were found beside a crib, near a radio that had been left playing lullabies on repeat. Claire froze, her mouth dried instantly, heart thudding. Crib, lullabies, playing on repeat. She clicked through, searching for more. Eventually she found a longer piece in a local blogger, first-person account by the responding officer. He had written about the scene with grim detail. The home was in disrepair. The stench of waste was overwhelming. Dogs had been left unattended for days. In the nursery, several pups were found curled beside a broken crib. There was mention of a child's blanket and an old radio, still softly repeating the same melody. Sleep now, love, the stars are near, ... Claire couldn't breathe. Her stomach twisted. The lullaby. Her lullaby. It hadn't come from her own memory. It had come from there, from that house. Suddenly, it all made sense. Maple hadn't been reacting to the words but to what they meant, to what they reminded her of. The smell, the sound, the helplessness, the loss. She looked at Maple again, eyes full now. "Oh, baby," she whispered. "You weren't crying because of the song. You were remembering." That night, Claire sat on the floor beside Maple's bed. For the first time, she didn't hum the lullaby. She didn't sing. She simply sat, hand on Maple's side, whispering gently, "It's not there anymore. You're safe. You've been safe for years." She repeated it like a prayer, over and over, long past midnight. But sleep didn't come, easily, because now Claire was the one haunted. Not just by Maple's pain but by the impossible coincidence that had threaded their lives together. How had she known that melody at all? Why had it embedded in her so deeply when she'd never heard of that house or those people? And then, just after 3 a.m., the twist came. David returned. He wasn't drunk. He wasn't angry. In fact, he seemed subdued, quiet in a way she hadn't seen since the very beginning. He stood in the doorway, as if afraid to come in, as if he wasn't sure he still belonged. Claire didn't speak right away. He said finally, eyes flickering toward Maple. "You figured it out, didn't you?" Claire nodded. "The lullaby, the house. She remembers it. She lived it." David swallowed hard. "So did I." The room dropped into silence so heavy it felt like it might break the floor. Claire blinked slowly, staring at him. "I grew up in that house, Claire. Not for long. Not the worst years anyway. Just a few months while they were between homes. My mother was the one with the dogs. It was before social services finally stepped in. I barely talk about it. I blocked most of it out. But that song," he broke off, looking down. "She used to play that song to keep the dogs calm, to keep me calm, too, when I cried at night." Claire covered her mouth. Her hand shook. She suddenly understood why she had known the melody all along. Not from the news, not from TV, not from anything recent. From David, from humming it in his sleep. From the way he sometimes tapped the rhythm with his fingers when he was anxious. From the pieces of him he never meant to share. And now, here, they were. All three of them. The woman who couldn't let go of a song. The man who had lived it. And the dog who had survived it. Claire felt tears sting her eyes, but she didn't cry, not yet. She only reached out to Maple, who was already sitting upright, ears perked, tail thumping softly against the floor. For the first time in years, she hadn't whimpered at the melody. Because it hadn't been sung, it had been understood, and for creatures born into silence and sorrow, understanding was the only true lullaby they had ever needed. The next morning, the house felt different. Not quieter, just softer. As if something heavy had finally lifted. Claire stood by the kitchen window, watching the light stretch across the yard, brushing against the trees and fence posts like a hand smoothing out wrinkles in time. David sat nearby, a coffee mug in his hands, not saying much. Maple lay between them, her head resting on David's foot, her breathing deep and even. No one played the lullaby that day. There was no need. It had already done what it came to do. It had carried grief across years of silence, woven pain into melody, and now finally brought it to light. What remained wasn't sorrow. It was something gentler. Something like peace. Claire reached down and scratched behind Maple's ears, and the dog opened her eyes, warm, clear. No trace of the panic that used to come with each note of that song. David leaned down, too, his fingers brushing Maple's fur like someone learning to touch the past without flinching. There was healing in that. Quiet, unremarkable healing. The kind that doesn't make noise but still remakes the world. They didn't need to talk about it anymore. Some stories don't need retelling once they've been heard. Some pain doesn't need explaining after it's been witnessed. The lullaby was no longer a trigger or a mystery. It was a thread that had tied them all together, dog, woman, man, and now it had served its purpose. Later that evening, Claire stepped into the backyard, Maple following just behind. The stars were starting to appear, one by one, like small promises blinking awake. Claire tilted her head back, closed her eyes, and let the silence wrap around her. Not empty, full. She didn't hum, she didn't sing, she just stood there, letting the night hold her, letting it hold them all. Because sometimes, love doesn't sound like a song. Sometimes, it sounds like a dog finally sleeping without fear.